Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, in this video, I want to talk again about a very serious issue with NPD, and I think with cluster B in general, which is the question of self-esteem. Okay, this is a very, very serious issue. Okay, because I believe that even just the question of self-esteem, when self-esteem is even present as an issue in one's life, okay, I think this is a sign that there is a serious alienation, okay, that's going to cause a lot of problems. In other words, just having the domino, just getting to the domino of even having self-esteem as an issue is going to end up producing a lot of, knock-on effects that, in my opinion, you're already in a lot of trouble when you're even in the question of self-esteem. Okay, so I just kind of want to look into what's really happening here, and I want to challenge a little bit, some of the orthodoxies, some of the common, almost like folklore around what's really happening when a person is in a situation of self-esteem. Okay, now here I'm saying I'm not talking about whether a person has good self-esteem, bad self-esteem. I'm talking about when self-esteem is even present as an issue in someone's life. Okay, I'm going even further. I'm saying anything in the spectrum of self-esteem, whether it's good or bad, I believe is problematic. Okay, I think that when a person is engaged properly and integrated in the world, I really don't think self-esteem is even a question. Okay, in fact, I'm not. I really believe that, and I think anything having to do with self-esteem, any question about self-esteem, any preoccupation or concern about self-esteem, in my opinion, is a problematic concern. Okay, but here's where I'm going to differ from, I think, common psychology. Okay, because I think kind of the standard trope that I see in psychology is when self-esteem is a problem in a person, when self-esteem is an issue in a person, the idea is that underlying what's going on is that there's a terrible self-concept, that self-esteem arises as sort of like a defense mechanism for when you feel terrible about yourself. You have like a complex of feeling terrible about yourself. I'm not sure that's accurate. Okay, I'm not saying, how would you say, I'm not saying it's good to have self-esteem, okay? And I'm not saying, I mean, I agree that it's a problem when self-esteem is an issue, but I don't think at the bottom of this is that you feel like you're not a good person. I think it's much more subtle and much more complex, okay? Or at least I just see a totally different picture. Okay, so basically, um, okay, just to kind of get started here. All right, okay, so in my opinion, whenever self-esteem is a question, what's really a question is two things. Okay, it's how do I feel? It's in the feeling stuff. It's how am I feeling? Okay, it's concern for how I feel. And when we're really talking about self-esteem, I think what we're really talking about is not exactly just how I feel about myself, but it also has to do with status in the world. Status, let's say, with people that I care about, status in the world in general, just status per se, because status is a very important aspect of, it's a very, how would you say, status is one of those very sensitive areas in human experience. Okay, because it's a trigger because status is a very essential aspect of intimidation and social communication. In other words, you know um, for example, we are innately sensitive to whether somebody is bigger, stronger, faster, smarter. Okay, or it just has more authority. Okay, more power. So humans, because we're social creatures, we are, even in prehistoric, like thousands and thousands of years. I mean, it's ingrained into us innately, instinctively, to be sort of sensitive to relative power, relative strength, relative authority. Okay, so status is extremely hot button. It's a very sensitive thing. It's sort of like it's probably on par with seeing how attractive somebody is, and that touches us very deeply. Seeing people that are very attractive, people that are very charismatic, that really hits us. And so anything having to do with status is a very primordial, very primal, a very primal importance, and really affects us. Okay, so um, when we talk about self-esteem, I think we are really talking about two things. We're talking about, our level of comfort, our level of gratification. So it's a question of gratification, comfort, or let's say anything that threatens gratification or comfort. So discomfort or frustration. Okay. So it's sort of a question about how we feel in terms of frustration, gratification, comfort around status. So it's a status preoccupation. Okay. Now, status can mean a lot of things. Status can be something about what's our level of prestige. Okay. It can have to do with our level of prestige, or it can have to do with our level of security in the world. Okay. So, for example, I may not be prestigious, but I may be part of a very comfortable, well established family. Okay. And just being part of that family gives me a lot of protection. Okay. Or let's say if I live in a certain part of the world, maybe I'm part of a certain political group and I have protection from them, or let's say a gang or a group or some kind of affiliation. Um, so it's sort of like there's two aspects to status. It's sort of like prestige and security. Okay. And there's a lot of situations, a lot of status situations where we may not have prestige, but we have security, or vice versa. We may not have a lot of security, but we got a lot of prestige. Okay. But either one, prestige or security, those things are going to be, very important to how we feel, whether we feel gratified, whether we feel insecure, whatever. Okay. So those are natural things to be preoccupied with. Okay. And I think probably if you want to try to really, really parse it, in addition to prestige and security, maybe you could talk about a third category of like relative power, but I personally think that, things like power, attractiveness, authoritative, authoritative, preeminence or whatever, those to me all fall into prestige. Okay. So I think it's good to keep things kind of simple. So I think probably the simplest model for me is, yeah, we understand that attractiveness is important. Yeah, we understand that power, wealth, how intimidating you are, authoritativeness. But I think all that is prestige. Okay. So basically, we're just talking about prestige and security and how that relates to how gratified or how uncertain or frustrated or maybe irritated we feel, or whatever. So basically, our level of prestige and security is going to be tied to satisfaction, gratification, and feeling comfortable. So it has to do with comfort and gratification. Okay, so basically, whenever self-esteem shows up as an issue in someone's life, because let's be honest, for some people, self-esteem is not even on the table. It's just they're too engaged in the world to really have it really as even something to think about. It's just not a present issue, and that's the first thing, when you're really engaged in the world. I just don't think self-esteem is going to show up as that big of a deal, because you've already got your priorities set up so that you're more concerned with your engagement than your status, but for some people, their status is more present as an issue than even their engagement in the world. So basically, in that situation, you do have a basic narcissism. Okay, I look at narcissism as kind of like a blister. It's sort of like a little pocket or like a cyst where you've sort of broken away from your engagement in the world because you've been overridden by your preoccupations about how you feel. So how you feel has sort of taken you out of, priority engagement in the world. Okay. So it's basically, you've been sort of like blistered out, sort of pocketed out of just pure engagement in the world, or, just priority engagement in the world. Right. So in other words, that's kind of a separateness. It's sort of like you've been sort of alienated from engagement because of, whatever preoccupation. So basically, if it's even an issue, self-esteem, if that's even an issue, okay, in anybody's life, in my life or anybody else, in that sense, I've sort of been overridden by a preoccupation of my level of gratification or my level of comfort. Okay, that how I feel has sort of taken over. And I guess let's just be honest. Okay, I think without training, okay, because life, I believe, is a sport. Life is a sport. So, knowledge doesn't mean anything. You have to be conditioned for a sport. Okay. How much you know is just a small part of it. To be effectively engaged in the world, you have to be conditioned into that engagement. Okay. So basically, I guess I sort of take the position that if you're not conditioned, if you haven't learned to be conditioned, if you haven't been trained, or if you haven't been raised to be conditioned, into interaction and engagement in the world, okay, I think it's only natural that we're going to be overridden by how we feel. Okay, in other words, I think probably without, you know, and look, we're not the only mammal. Like even elephants, a lot of mammals, if they're not trained by their parent, they can't really engage in the world. Okay, so it's only natural that humans probably, we really can't spontaneously just exist in the world. We're not like a snake where you just pop out of the egg and you just go and live your life. We have to be sort of trained into and conditioned into being, complete. So basically, without training, without a certain conditioning, I think naturally we will tend to put how we feel over our engagement in the world. I think, and even when we engage in the world, we'll engage with an agenda as to how we feel. Okay, so how we feel will even drive our engagement in the world. So, in other words, the priority, probably naturally for human, without conditioning, is to put, how we feel, our feelings, ahead of our engagement. Okay, so that's probably the natural default state without training and conditioning. Okay, so I don't think it's pathological. Okay, it's not pathological, but it is a problem. Okay, because it's an area where we haven't had very crucial conditioning. Okay, and in my opinion, it's not just about not being narcissistic. It's not just about, so I don't, so I can have better mental health. It's not. It's more important than that. I think to be a complete human so that you can have effective living in the world, so that you can have good diplomacy, good politics. You know, I think in order to have, effectiveness as a human, I think we need to have a conditioning, okay, where we subordinate our feelings and we prioritize our engagement in the world. All right. So in other words, this is essential to our humanity. It's not just so I can just qualify for good mental health. It's more important than that. This is about, this is almost like a minimum requirement so that we can even have good politics, so that we can even have effective community, the quality of our communities, like let's say community politics, but even like running a business or having good, having good relations between people. So in other words, I think, how would you say, like, this question of putting feelings before engagement, I think, yeah, it's very important in personality disorders, but I think we should all understand that, beyond the world of mental health, you cannot have an effective world of diplomacy, an effective world of competition and trade, or, administration of, let's say businesses or government bodies. You can't really have effective human community if you don't have humans to be in community. Okay. And I think part of us being fully human, not just not being disordered, it's more than that. But, let's forget about the disorders. Let's forget about the mental health. But even for us to be fully human, okay, for us to be truly worthy of being called human beings, okay, I think we have to confront the question, okay, of conditioning ourselves so that our engagement in the world now becomes prioritized over how we feel. Okay, so basically, when the question of self-esteem shows up, I think that's just a telltale that a person hasn't completed a person hasn't completed their engagement with the world. There's still like little pockets, okay, where we put our feelings and how we feel about our status or our security. We're putting that ahead of our engagement. Okay. In other words, we haven't completed our adaptation and our conditioning to be fully human. Okay. I mean, human in the sense, if you want to think of a human as not just a person who's popped out of the womb with genetics of a human being, but somebody who's been conditioned to be the best you can be. Okay. So that, for example, let's say part of being human is not just being able to walk, it's also being able to jump, it's being able to climb. I mean, you have to see that, part of being human is reaching our basic potentials. Okay. And a classic example of that is reading and writing. You don't come out of the womb, you're not born being able to read and write. You have to be trained and conditioned to read and write. Okay. So when a person is illiterate, okay, that that doesn't mean they don't have the genetics of the human being. They have the genetics of the human being, but they haven't become fully human in the complete realization of potential. Okay, because I guess we're all born with the potential to read and write, but without conditioning, it'll never happen spontaneously. Okay, so likewise, this idea of putting our engagement in the world ahead of how we feel, okay, it's kind of like reading and writing. It doesn't happen automatically. We have to be trained and conditioned into that. Okay, so I'm just saying that wherever self esteem shows up, it's like a little pocket of like almost the equivalent of illiteracy, okay, where there's a part of us that is the potential hasn't been realized because we haven't conditioned ourselves to be able to have that. You know what I mean? So in other words, it's almost like, yeah, it's almost like a little place of illiteracy where we just haven't, there's something very important to us in our development that we haven't been conditioned. We haven't been conditioned to realize. And so that's like a little pocket of undeveloped, underdeveloped stuff. So in that sense, it's a little pocket where we haven't become fully human. Okay. I'm not saying that as a put down. It's not a put down. It's an observation. Okay. Just like it's not putting someone down to say he's illiterate. Some people are illiterate. Okay. It's not putting them down, but it is saying that it is an aspect, literacy. That's an aspect of our humanity that may not automatically be developed. Okay. So in other words, when I see self-esteem show up, and it shows up for me too, believe me, I'm like everybody else, but I have to realize that's like a part of my own literacy that I haven't developed. Okay, it's a part. It's not literacy, but it's equivalent to. It's analogous to literacy, in the sense that it's a part of my completion as a human being. Part of my development that I have not conditioned myself to. Okay, so basically. So what's underneath self-esteem is underneath self-esteem that I feel bad about myself. It's much more complex than that. It is literally a part of ourselves that hasn't been conditioned and developed. Okay, so it's almost like, to me, it's just like saying, it's like something equivalent to literacy that hasn't been developed in me. That's what I think is underneath self-esteem. Okay, and as a byproduct, okay, yeah, if as a byproduct, I kind of dimly understand there's something about me that hasn't been developed, well, of course, I'm not going to feel good about it. Okay. Of course, I'm not going to feel good about it. If you're a person who's illiterate, damn well, you can tell us, it feels bad, because it naturally feels bad when there's things to be developed in you that you haven't developed. Okay. Of course it feels bad, but the feeling bad about it, feeling bad, that's a byproduct of the real problem. And the real problem is we haven't developed something. Okay. So it's something that hasn't been developed in us. And I think a lot of us, I think even a lot of people in the psychology community, even people in the mental health community, I think they have a lot of areas that they haven't developed. Okay. Because I find people in the mental health community to be very comfortable, to be very kind of sedentary, just kind of like, they sort of see the health of a human being as the things you do sitting on a couch, having a conversation. So I think they're probably not very extroverted in the sense of engagement in logistical terms. Okay. In other words, we could question whether in a more sophisticated society, okay, you couldn't qualify to give mental health counseling if you didn't have something in your life where you're qualified, like say as an engineer or as a technician or as somebody who does practical things in the world where you make things work and you're actually working engaged in the world. So in other words, like say you can't go to medical school without first getting a bachelor's degree just in something, or you can't be a military officer without first having a bachelor's degree. Well, maybe you shouldn't even be able to enter a mental health program without first being effective as an electrician, or let's say as a plumber or a computer programmer, or maybe like a bus driver, a commercial driver, or maybe running a kitchen, or some kind of credential that shows that you actually can engage with the world and engage with people in practical logistical terms. Because otherwise, you'll go into mental health and you will see the world sort of in that illiteracy, where you'll sort of see the world as putting how you feel prioritized over engagement. Okay, so if you don't select people to be mental health professionals that already have engagement as priority in the world, you're going to see that narcissism in that mental health field. So, I am diagnosing the mental health field as having inherent narcissism, which is the equivalent of kind of analogous to illiteracy, where there are areas where we haven't conditioned ourselves to put engagement ahead of how we feel. And of course, self-esteem, any good good mental health clinician will say we should strive to have good self-esteem. That right there to me is a sign that those people haven't been selected, okay, from people who already are literate, in the sense of having that conditioning to put engagement ahead of feeling. Okay, so what to me is at the bottom of self-esteem is not primarily that I feel bad, okay, that I feel bad about myself and I'm just compensating. What's really happening is that there's something equivalent to literacy that we haven't conditioned ourselves, haven't adapted to, okay, which is putting engagement ahead of feeling, okay. And that self-esteem is a sign that there's a little area where we're putting feeling ahead of engagement. All right. Now, what do I think is the real danger of having these like little pockets where we put feelings ahead of engagement? Okay. Well, okay. I think that where we haven't learned to, let's say, tolerate discomfort and put engagement ahead of how we feel. Okay. In those little areas where we still have feelings, our feeling and our comfort and our comfort and our gratification is sort of like primordially prioritized, in those areas where we don't have, let's say, the equivalent of literacy. All right. I think we will have distortions in perception. Okay. Because wherever there's pockets in me where my feelings come first, okay, I will not be objective. Okay. Because being objective is actually a dialectical process where you have to tolerate and consider a lot of things that may challenge how you feel. Okay. Because we don't survey the panorama of our lives, neutrally. Okay. How we feel is part of how we survey. Okay. How we assess things, how we determine things, okay, has a lot to do with how we feel, because we have attachments, we have interest as people. So in order to have an objective survey of the world, you have to be able to put things ahead of how you feel, because otherwise you won't even process information, okay, or you'll filter information to sort of select things that are not challenging to how you feel. And you're not going to really process the full torrent of data. Okay, so the problem that I see with self-esteem is that's an area where you're dominating, where what's dominating is how you feel, and in those areas you will not be objective. Okay, so it's a sign that you have a pocket of your mind that cannot be objective, and where there's that one pocket, there's probably other pockets. Okay, so basically the question is whether you even have good reality testing. Okay. And to me, the answer to that is not to just work on being more realistic. You can't do that. Life is a sport. You can't just mentally just wish yourself to be more objective. It's impossible. You have to condition yourself. Okay. You have to condition yourself. So because life is a sport, if I just want to be more objective, if I want to be more realistic, if I want to have better reality testing, I can't just psych myself into that. I have to, here's the thing. I have to get that literacy, the equivalent of literacy. And what is it? I have to condition myself to set aside my priority of comfort and gratification, okay, and put as a priority the engagement in the world. So in a weird way, if I want to be more objective in this world, if I want to have better reality testing, I don't start by psyching myself into a more realistic attitude. Okay, that's not it. Paradoxically, the way I get there is I just get more engaged in the world. Okay. And I actively condition myself to get more engaged in the world as a priority over how I feel. Okay. And slowly, as I get my engagement prioritized, okay, so that engagement becomes more important and my feelings and gratification sort of evaporate, into the background, then I will automatically have a more, realistic and a more objective, assessment of reality. And my reality testing will get better because I not because I worked on it directly, but because I overcame that that native priority where we sort of come out of the womb. We're sort of born prioritizing feeling over engagement. So if anybody wants to practice this, okay, I offer this as just a practice. If anybody feels that they're not very objective in life, if anybody feels that they don't have really the best reality testing, if anybody feels that they tend to be kind of biased and not very objective, don't try to work on your thoughts directly. Okay, because that's just not going to work. I don't think it's going to work. Why don't you experiment? You can just experiment with maybe just getting more active in your work, in your environment, in your activities, in your responsibilities, and just get more engaged in the world, and try not to put how you feel, okay, as the priority. And even trade off, where you trade off some discomfort, and you trade off maybe not getting gratifications, maybe not knowing, maybe just walking around with insecurities, with open questions, maybe not knowing what my status is, and just leaving those as open question where you don't get resolution, and you just focus your energy on just getting more engaged in the world. It could be the simplest job. It could be just managing your finances. It could be, just keeping your house in order, doing all of the above, being a little more involved in your community, just whatever's in your community environment, neighbors, relatives, family, friends, and just working more on your engagement in the environment, and just making that a focus, and not tending to your feelings immediately. Okay. Putting your focus on engagement in the world, and just carrying the discomforts, trading the discomfort for having a better engagement in the world. And then after, like, say 2 or 3 months of conditioning and really dedicated, like a sport, take it like a sport. Then at the end of that, then ask yourself if you feel like you're more objective, if you feel like you're more, you have a better, let's say, better reality testing. Okay. And for anybody who wants to get into mental health, I would say, as an experiment, why don't you try being a truck driver for a couple of years? Just being a truck driver is actually a profession. That's a profession. It has a lot of responsibility. You could get in an accident. There's a lot of technique involved in driving a truck, going up and down hills, and stopping distances, and just a lot of responsibility too. Dealing with weather, dealing with schedules, or let's say if you're not into that kind of stuff, maybe like manage a fast food restaurant. Maybe get a job in a fast food restaurant, but rise up to the point where you become a manager, where you have to actually deal with employees, you have to deal with suppliers, you have to deal with bosses, managers, higher up managers, and just getting into the logistics of making things work, and really becoming good at it, and putting that ahead of your feelings. Okay. And then maybe after you get a certain level of competence, then as you go into mental health, you will have an extra literacy, okay, that will be a very important tool in the toolbox, to really understanding other people that are having issues, getting more engaged in the world. Okay. So basically, to summarize here, I am very concerned about self-esteem, but not because I want people to have better self-esteem. Okay. It's because I don't think self-esteem should even be on the table. Okay. To me, self-esteem is a sign that we have a little pocket of something equivalent, and analogous to being illiterate, where we haven't developed a human potential, to condition ourselves to put engagement in the world over how we feel. Okay. To me, self-esteem is just a concern with how we feel. That to me is a fundamental narcissism. Okay. If you want to define narcissism in the most basic terms, it's little areas where we haven't developed our humanity to put engagement in the world over how we feel. That to me is narcissism. I think narcissism is very widespread, and I think a lot of people in the mental health community have it. Okay. Now, maybe subclinical, clinical narcissism, that's different from just narcissism, but narcissism per se is just little areas where we haven't developed and conditioned ourselves to have our little areas where you haven't conditioned ourselves to have our engagement ahead of feeling. Okay. So, to me, self-esteem is a sign that we haven't overcome that. And so, anywhere there's self-esteem, the real question is not how we actually feel about ourselves or whether we should feel better. It's more like, this is a chance for us to get more engaged in the world and to dissolve our concerns about how we feel. Okay. So that's my understanding of self-esteem and why I think it's such an issue. Okay. So thanks for watching.